Julia Ioffe of The Atlantic posted a story online that sort of blew up. The secret correspondence between Donald Trump Jr. and WikiLeaks. And in the article, she details messages between WikiLeaks and Donald Trump Jr. before the general election, which show WikiLeaks actively soliciting Trump Jr.'s cooperation and making a series of increasingly bold requests, including asking for Trump's tax returns, urging the Trump campaign on election day to reject the results of the election as rigged, and requesting that the president-elect tell Australia to appoint Julian Assange ambassador to the US. So this shows what was already obvious, that WikiLeaks had taken sides in the general election in favor of Trump. Now, while some are using this as a way to discredit the work that WikiLeaks does, this actually goes hand in hand with what WikiLeaks has always been about. So in this video, I want to discuss the motive that WikiLeaks had to work with Trump, not to defend them, but to help you understand the work that WikiLeaks does and why they do it. So in this 2010 piece by Aaron Batty, he broke down the philosophy of Julian Assange, and by extension, WikiLeaks. And he starts off by quoting Assange, saying, "To radically shift regime behavior, we must think clearly and boldly, for if we have learned anything, it is that regimes do not want to be changed. We must think beyond those who have gone before us, and discover technological changes that embolden us with ways to act in which our forebears could not." So while that's sort of a top-level view of what WikiLeaks does, it helps you understand why they would work with Trump to work against Clinton, as Clinton sort of represented the status quo, or as Assange would put it, the current regime behavior. And while Trump has been described as an authoritarian, Julian Assange saw the existing US government as an authoritarian conspiracy. Authoritarian regimes give rise to forces which oppose them by pushing against the individual and collective will to freedom, truth, and self-realization. Plans which assist authoritarian rule, once discovered, induce resistance. Hence, those plans are concealed by successful authoritarian powers. This is enough to define their behavior as conspiratorial. So that's kind of a complex way of saying that authoritarianism and conspiracies go together like peanut butter and jam. So for an authoritarian force to be successful, it needs to act like it's not one. And the way to do that is through the use of conspiracies. Now, these are not the sort of Alex Jones type conspiracies that you're used to hearing about. For Assange, by contrast, a conspiracy is something fairly banal, simply any network of associates who act in concert by hiding their concerted association from outsiders, an authority that proceeds by preventing its activities from being visible enough to provoke counter-reaction. It might be something as dramatic as a loose coalition of conspirators working to start a war with Iraq, or it might simply be the banal, everyday deceptions and conspiracies of normal diplomatic procedure. So while some see conspiracies as being executed by a centralized power and issuing orders below them, Assange sees conspiracies as a group of connected individuals that aren't all directly connected to each other. So Assange's approach is different than, say, how the US goes after terrorists. While the US has traditionally fought terrorism by trying to bring down the leaders or the dots on this graph, Assange's approach is to undermine the links between the individuals, putting into question the entire system in which they operate. He decides that the most effective way to attack this kind of organization would be to make leaks a fundamental part of the conspiracy's information environment, which is why the point is not that particular leaks are specifically effective. You destroy the conspiracy, in other words, by making it so paranoid of itself that it can no longer conspire. So even if all the elements of the conspiracy still exist, depriving themselves of a vigorous flow of information to connect them all together as a conspiracy prevents them from acting as a conspiracy. So this really explains the fundamental difference between a whistleblower like Edward Snowden and WikiLeaks. So with Edward Snowden, he was focused on exposing a specific injustice, in his case, the NSA's violation of privacy rights. Whereas WikiLeaks is looking to undermine government secrecy as a whole, viewing it as antithetical to progress. Which is why WikiLeaks will dump terabytes of information online, whereas Edward Snowden went directly to journalists with the data that he had taken from the NSA, so that the journalists could go through the data and only use and expose what was important to the actual story of the NSA's violation of privacy. And this gets back to why Julian Assange and WikiLeaks was willing to work with the Trump campaign, who in their minds held no power, and likely thought, like everyone else did, would lose the election to Clinton anyways. So looking at the 2016 election, WikiLeaks saw the Clinton campaign as the status quo, which is the epitome of everything that WikiLeaks works to undermine. But what they didn't really foresee was that throwing a bomb in the system with Donald Trump may actually be worse than the status quo. Now, there are possible side benefits to Trump winning the election, and one of them is that it seems like he may be accelerating the rate at which progressives are taking over the system. We already saw a bunch of wins last week from socialists and progressives. But you also can't ignore the damage that Trump is doing. Everything from immigration to the Supreme Court to undermining environmental protections.